Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 608. I'm Tom Cagley, your host, and today the SPaMCAST 608 features our essay, An Agile Team in a Waterfall Company. Teams like this exist, and sometimes even flourish. Our essay explores how that is possible and how teams in this circumstance can help evolve whole organizations. We also have a visit from Gene Hughson with his Form Follows Function column. Gene and I talked about how an architect has to avoid bias generated by expertise that they have spent years developing. An Agile Team in a Waterfall Company by Thomas M. Cagley Jr., Megan E. Cagley. I was recently asked about interfacing an Agile team with the rest of a waterfall company. This is not an uncommon theme in the questions I receive. A synopsis of the scenario was, I've been working at an organization that has an interesting structure. Our part uses Agile, while the larger umbrella uses a waterfall approach. The team I lead as a project manager / scrum master performs well, but is bogged down with the commitments made by the waterfall side of the house. This means that even though we are a scrum team, we have release dates that were promised at the start of the year that we're bound to. What advice can you give me to try to overcome this? There are several threads in this simple scenario that have to be addressed to, air quotes, fix the problem in the long run, which is not simple in the least. First one is prioritizing work entry. The second is postponing commitment. 3, engaging executives on Agile values. 4, value chain analysis. A long-term solution will need to synchronize the ideas from each of these threads. The first one, prioritizing work entry. One more piece of information before I start into a cleaned up version of my initial response back to the person who asked the question. The person was asking the question, and I have worked together before. We have some shared history, which made the conversation easier. Having a relationship with someone, you can get to the point much faster. So, suggestions. 1, you could try to hold your breath until the waterfall approach from the home office goes away. This has a low probability of having a positive impact, but it is dramatic. Do not try this at home. The same thing would be true for a hunger strike. In order to generate changes, you'll need to have a concerted discussion about Agile values and behaviors. Facilitating this discussion to generate an action plan will not be quick and won't help your team in the short run. 2, a better short-term solution within the span of control of you and your product owner is to leverage the product backlog as a gate to control work coming into the team. There are several steps that need to be implemented in this statement. 1, you need to have a backlog. 2, you need a product owner. 3, the team can't be allowed to accept work that is not prioritized on the product backlog by the product owner. If this is difficult because the sprints are too long, shorten the sprint length. Start with a discussion of how to address the item during the next retrospective. Your team will have ideas for addressing work that appears outside of training. 4, work that is committed to by the home office and placed on your backlog with release dates need to be identified. Use a flag or a ticket depending on the tool that you're using and prioritize them just like any other piece of work. 5, add Kanban to your Scrum. Establish WIP limits for each step in the process and take work from the backlog only when you have the capacity to work on it. Scrumban is a great adaptation which allows you to establish flow and visually keep track of work. 6, Flag the items promised by the home office and use that flag as a prioritization tool. Flow and flow metrics will allow you to predict when those items can be delivered and when they need to be pulled into your flow. This would impact prioritization. Use throughput accounting rather than story points. Use the work entry process to protect the team and to deliver based on the waterfall promises. Use throughput to gauge how much work you can do, not story points and velocity. This feels like a bit of a prescription. However, it's an outline that will need to be customized based on your specific team and stakeholders. In a nutshell, start by establishing control over your work entry process. If you can control how the team accepts work, you can satisfy your corporate requirements or at least have a good conversation about priorities. This is the first step and will help allow your team to increase their performance to an even higher level. The next step is to build an understanding of how postponing commitment actually increases throughput and value delivery. Thoughts, comments are all welcome. Please feel free to reach out to us at spamcastinfo@gmail.com. Read the rest of these essays. There'll be links in the show notes that will get you there. And there were 305 to 600 word essays that went with this as we peeled back and tackled the other items in that list. Prioritization, work entry, we talked about today. Postponing commitment, engaging executives on agile values, and value chain analysis. Gene Hughson, welcome back to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Oh, thanks, Tom. Always a pleasure to be here.
Gene, it is always a pleasure to talk to you. Gene, today, can we wrestle with more of your observations on being an application architect in the real world and talk about scenarios where it is just too easy to get really closely wedded to your own ideas or your own concepts and therefore start to block out others?
Exactly. It is one of those things that, unfortunately, it's part of the learning process in your career. It's important to have strong opinions on how things should work, what technical standards should be in place. It is all too easy, however, to become too fond of your own opinion. It's all too easy to fail to give due credit or due regard to other people's concerns and opinions and contributions when making design decisions. And consequently, it's one of those ones, the old saying about failing fast definitely applies here. You want to make that mistake, get it over with, and move on and learn from it.
I mean, I think that's a pretty common cognitive bias that we're all sort of saddled with. How did you break through that? I mean, that's hard.
It is, and it's funny. I think I know you and I have talked about it before, and I think we've talked about it on air. Technology is kind of my second career. I started off in law enforcement and spent 11 years in that before I moved on to technology. And it's funny, the way you overcome it in technology is kind of the way you overcome it in the other. We used to say that nobody was really good at their job until they came very close to getting their butt kicked. And it's the same in technology. Sometimes you've got to kind of go far enough down the road of being too sure of yourself and almost screw up bad enough to get yourself in trouble, to get that sense of perspective that, you know what, I don't know it all. I don't always intuitively know the right way to do everything. And it starts building an appreciation in you for collaborating with other people and listening to other people. And that in and of itself is something that is kind of a less drastic learning method. If you're working with other talented individuals and really gaining an appreciation for their contributions, that can help with that humility. Uh, I was fortunate to work and learn from some very again talented folks. Some that I interacted with online, and then some that I worked with at the same job. And in all honesty, the ones who were online acquaintances, it was much easier to learn from and appreciate their abilities and their perspectives simply because we weren't competing. They were working for their companies and I was working for mine. We would share experiences and stories, and it was kind of a no cost thing to be able to appreciate somebody else's take on a particular problem. And, that is one of those things that a lot of sometimes self-awareness comes over time. But, being able to be honest with yourself about, yeah, you know what, I don't like to be wrong, but sometimes it's better to admit that somebody's got a better idea than go down the wrong path.
How long did it take you to understand that in your professional life? And did that happen? That happened before you were in the software space?
It did to an extent. It's one of those things. I won't say that I'm completely there. Even today, sometimes it's tough to back down and go with someone else's idea at times. It gets easier over the as you go along. But again, yeah, part of it I think came out of that first career, and then as I grew through the second career, I would say I've probably been better at it earlier simply because of the foundation of the previous career.
What advice would you give? I mean, I think you're pretty well detailed that it's important to recognize the value of ideas wherever they come from and to learn to give that up. But is there a piece of advice that would get a newly minted application architect in the right spot faster?
Yeah, I would say first of all is interacting with others, people who are senior to you are great mentors, people who are your peers who again are doing things that aren't in competition with you, and also recognizing your strengths and your weaknesses. In my particular case, I am great back end aspects of software development. I am not a UI person. It's it's funny. My wife is the one who decorates our home because the years of my adult life where I did not live with her, I lived in an apartment that had bare walls that were painted white. It served its purpose, but it was not pretty, and that kind of is the extent of my UI skills. But I had the privilege of being able to partner with a really super talented UI guy, and for a fact, it was funny. I was his mentor on back end system design, and we no longer work together. That was a couple jobs back, but I have no doubt he's probably exceeded my abilities far and away when it comes to software architecture. He just had a real feel for putting together both functional and pleasing, aesthetically pleasing systems.
The learning is good, and the learning from what you're good at and what you can do is good also. Gene, this has been fantastic. If people wanted to continue the conversation on this topic, how would they go about reaching out to you?
Generally, two sources. I'm on LinkedIn and also my blog, genehugson.wordpress.com.
Super. And we will have that contact information in the show notes.
Perfect. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. In Reread Saturday News, this week we tackle Chapter 5, which is the beginning of Part 2 of Tame Your Workflow. The chapter is titled Where to Focus Improvement Efforts. Part 2 transitions us from improving wait time and flow efficiency and begins a deep dive into theory of constraints. We also make a big distinction about the difference between a constraint and a bottleneck. Remember to buy your copy of Tame Your Workflow, link in the show notes. Support both the blog and the podcast. And, more importantly, the authors. The Software Process and Measurement Cast number 609 will feature the return of Dr. David Rico. Dave and I discuss contracting and Agile. This is a crucial real-world topic that is often swept under the carpet and politely ignored. That won't happen in the SPaMCAST 609. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?